A millionaire finds this 4-year-old beggar girl digging in the cemetery for 24 hours straight. You won't believe why she's doing it. The wind howled through the gravestones of the Oak Haven Cemetery, whipping up swirling eddies of dried leaves that danced in the frigid night air. Theodore Albright adjusted his heavy coat, his footsteps echoing along the cobblestone path. At 47, the businessman bore the deep lines of someone intimately acquainted with loneliness. His once vibrant brown eyes now seemed permanently veiled in a mist of melancholy. The white marble mausoleum stood imposingly against the dark sky. Theodore approached with hesitant steps, as he had every week for the past 5 years, ever since his wife had perished in an accident he couldn't shake. It was then that an unusual movement caught his attention. Through the dimness, he made out a small figure huddled a few graves ahead. Intrigued, Theodore cautiously approached. It was a girl, no older than 6. Her tiny hands were digging into the earth with feverish determination, completely oblivious to his presence. The girl was covered in dirt, her light blue dress almost unrecognizable beneath the layer of grime. Her dark, tangled hair fell over her focused face. "Little one," Theodore called out softly, but she showed no reaction. She continued digging, her fingertips already raw, trembling with cold and exhaustion. The businessman looked around for a guardian, but the cemetery was completely deserted at that hour. The scene deeply disturbed him. There was something desperate in the way the girl devoted herself to her mysterious task, as if nothing else in the world mattered. The grave she was digging didn't have a headstone, just a simple wooden cross, weathered by time. Theodore returned the following morning, bringing water and a sandwich. The girl was still there, in the same position, as if she hadn't moved an inch. Her broken fingernails left small bloodstains on the upturned earth. He tried again to communicate, to offer help, but it was as if she was in another world, completely unaware of his presence. On the 3rd day, the scene repeated itself. The little girl's determination was almost supernatural. She didn't eat, she didn't drink, she just kept digging. Theodore began to notice details. The delicacy of her features, so young and yet already marked by a deep sadness. The increasingly evident tremor in her fragile arms, the increasingly labored breathing. It was then that Mildred Hayes, his 63-year-old housekeeper, appeared at the cemetery. She had grown concerned about her employer's constant outings and decided to follow him. Upon seeing the girl, her usually serene face twisted into a strange expression, almost of recognition, but she quickly recomposed herself. "Mr. Albright, this isn't right. We need to call the authorities," Mildred said, her usually calm voice betraying a note of unease. But before they could make any decision, the little girl finally succumbed to exhaustion. Her tiny body toppled forward, like a discarded rag doll, onto the earth she had so desperately tried to remove. Theodore picked her up without hesitation, startled by her lightness, by the feverish heat emanating from her skin. At the city hospital, the doctors diagnosed severe malnutrition. The girl didn't utter a word. Her eyes remained fixed on a distant point, as if she was still lost in her interrupted mission. The nurses cleaned her, treated her wounds, but she remained in an absolute silence that unnerved everyone. The authorities began asking questions. No one knew who the girl was. No disappearances had been reported. It was as if she had materialized, out of nowhere, brought by the strong wind that was still blowing outside. Theodore couldn't explain what drove him, but he felt an inexplicable connection with this mysterious child. Something in her lost gaze reminded him of himself, of how he had felt after losing his wife. He decided to assume temporary responsibility for the girl while the search for her family continued. It was then that he discovered her name, Olivia. One of the older nurses recognized the girl by sight, said she sometimes saw her walking with An elderly woman in the Lower East Side, but didn't know any further details. Sarah Jenkins, the 36-year-old social worker assigned to the case, warned Theodore about the challenges of caring for a traumatized child. But there was something in her eyes, normally so pragmatic, that suggested she too was intrigued by the mystery surrounding Olivia. After obtaining temporary legal authorization, Theodore took the girl to his mansion in the Catskill Mountains. The stone manor, usually so silent and cold, seemed even more imposing that night. Mildred prepared a room especially for Olivia, but her expression remained tense, as if the girl's presence disturbed her in some way. On the first night, as the storm raged outside, Theodore was awakened by a strange noise. He found Olivia sitting on the floor of her room, obsessively drawing on the wall with a piece of chalk she had found. The same symbol was repeated dozens of times, a circle with a star inside. The businessman felt his heart skip a beat. That symbol, it was identical to the pendant his wife always wore, a family heirloom that had vanished on the day of her passing. When he tried to question Olivia about the drawing, she just continued her compulsive task, her glazed eyes reflecting a knowledge that seemed beyond her years. That same night, Mildred watched the scene from the doorway, her hands nervously clutching her apron. In her room later, she opened a locked drawer and took out a yellowed envelope. Inside, an old photograph showed two young nurses smiling in front of a hospital. On the back, a faded date and two signatures, Mildred Hayes and Connie Santos. The housekeeper stared at the photo for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. Then she put it back and closed the drawer forcefully, as if trying to lock away long-buried secrets along with it. Outside, the wind continued to howl, carrying with it the weight of truths yet to be revealed. The following days, at the Albright mansion, were marked by a disturbing silence, broken only by the insistent sound of chalk against the walls. Olivia continued to live in her own world, compulsively drawing the same symbol on every surface she could find. Theodore watched, torn between concern for the girl's mental state and a growing unease about the meaning of that circle with the star. During a particularly cold afternoon, while trying to focus on reports from his company, Theodore found an old box of photographs. Among the yellowed images, one in particular caught his attention. His wife, radiant in a blue dress, the pendant, with the star shining on her neck. His hands trembled as he touched the photograph. The accident that took her still haunted him. The runaway car on the mountain road, the inconclusive investigation, the body never found. It was then that he heard a crash coming from the kitchen. When he got there, he found Mildred picking up shards of a broken plate, her hands visibly shaking. Olivia was standing in the doorway, staring intently at the housekeeper with a disturbing intensity. "I'm sorry, sir," Mildred muttered, avoiding looking at the girl. "I don't know what happened, the plate just slipped." But Theodore noticed something different. On the kitchen counter, among crumbs of cookies, there was a drawing made with flour, the same circle with the star. Mildred quickly wiped it away with a cloth, erasing the symbol, but her hands trembled even more. That night, Theodore received a visit from Sarah Jenkins, the child therapist who had begun treating Olivia. Her unconventional methods, using art and music, seemed to be the only thing that elicited any reaction in the girl. "There's something in her drawings that intrigues me," Sarah said, spreading some papers on the desk in the office. "It's not just the symbol. Look how she always draws a blank figure in the background, almost imperceptible." Theodore leaned over the drawings. Indeed, in each of them, there was a pale silhouette, like a ghost watching the scene. His heart quickened as he realized that the figure always wore something on its neck, something that resembled his wife's pendant. The session was interrupted by a shrill scream coming from upstairs. When they ran upstairs, they found Olivia's room in complete chaos. All the drawings she had made were torn, scattered on the floor like dead leaves. Mildred was standing in the middle of the room, a vacant look on her face. I was just cleaning," she stammered. "The drawings, they fell. It was an accident." But Sarah noticed the nail marks on the papers, the deliberate way they had been destroyed. Olivia, sitting in a corner, just watched with her big, accusatory eyes. The following morning, during breakfast, something extraordinary happened. A violent thunderstorm was approaching, and the first claps of thunder made the mansion's windows rattle. Olivia, who had never shown fear of anything, began to tremble. Her eyes fixed on Mildred, who was serving coffee with unsteady hands. "She said the truth is buried," Olivia whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. The sound of her voice was so unexpected that Mildred dropped the coffee cup, which shattered on the floor. Theodore could hardly believe it. It was the first words he had heard from the girl since he found her in the cemetery. "Who said that, Olivia?" he asked gently, trying not to frighten her. But the girl had returned to her usual silence, her eyes now fixed on the storm brewing outside. That afternoon, Theodore received a disturbing call. His private investigator had discovered something about the house where Olivia supposedly lived with an elderly woman. The place had mysteriously caught fire days before he found the girl in the cemetery. Firefighters found no bodies, but there was also no sign of the old woman. While digesting this information, Theodore watched Mildred through the window of his office. The housekeeper was in the garden, even with the heavy rain that was beginning to fall, digging frantically among the flower beds. When she realized she was being watched, she quickly threw something into her bag and went back inside. At night, when everyone was asleep, Theodore went to the garden with a flashlight. In the place where Mildred was digging, he found a piece of paper half buried, partially destroyed by the rain. He could only distinguish a few words: Santa Clara Hospital, and a date 30 years ago. The sound of footsteps made him turn abruptly. Olivia was standing at the patio door, her white nightgown fluttering in the wind. Her eyes looked different, almost adult in her childish face. "She's scared," the girl said, her voice just a whisper, above the sound of the rain, "afraid of what's buried." Before Theodore could answer, a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a deafening thunderclap. When his vision adjusted again, Olivia had disappeared. Disturbed, Theodore spent the night awake in his office, researching Santa Clara Hospital. It was an old institution closed decades ago. In the few photographs he found online, something caught his attention: the hospital's symbol, engraved on its facade, a circle with a cross inside, very similar to what Olivia obsessively drew, only replacing the cross with a star. It was then that he heard a noise coming from the library. Approaching silently, he saw Mildred through the crack in the door. The housekeeper was kneeling near the bookshelf, removing a loose piece from the baseboard. From inside the hiding place, she pulled out a bundle of yellowed letters. Theodore watched in silence as she read one of the letters, her hands shaking more and more. Suddenly Mildred raised her face, and he could see tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "Forgive me," she whispered to the paper in her hands. "Forgive me, Connie. I had no choice." The name hit Theodore like a punch. Connie. Wasn't that the name of the woman who supposedly took care of Olivia? Before he could process this information, a piercing scream cut through the silence of the night. It came from Olivia's room. When he got there, he found the girl standing on the bed, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. On the wall behind her, dozens of circles with stars had been drawn, forming a spiral that seemed to pulse in the light of the storm. The following morning dawned with a heavy atmosphere in the Albright mansion. Theodore couldn't get the scene. He had witnessed in the library out of his head, Mildred begging forgiveness from a Connie, the same name as the woman who supposedly took care of Olivia. The coincidences were beginning to accumulate in a disturbing way. During breakfast, Mildred was more agitated than usual. Her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold the tray, and her eyes constantly avoided the corner where Olivia was sitting, drawing as always. The girl, in turn, seemed different that morning. There was a new intensity in her gaze, as if something had awakened inside her. It was then that Theodore received a call from Ethan Roberts, the 58-year-old former investigative journalist he had hired to discreetly investigate the case. His voice conveyed an unusual urgency. "Mr. Albright, I need to see you immediately. I've discovered something about Santa Clara Hospital that you need to know." Theodore scheduled the meeting in his office for that afternoon. While waiting, he decided to visit the address where Olivia supposedly lived with Connie. The place was in a simple neighborhood on the outskirts of Oakhaven. The house, partially destroyed by the fire, still exuded an acrid smell of smoke. While examining the rubble, something caught his attention. Among the ashes and debris, a leather-bound notebook had partially resisted the fire. Its pages were filled with meticulous writing and codes that made no sense. But what intrigued Theodore the most were the old photographs stapled between the pages, all from Santa Clara Hospital, dated 30 years ago. In one of the photos, two young nurses smiled at the camera. Theodore immediately recognized Mildred, but it was the other woman that made his heart leap. She was wearing a necklace with a pendant, a circle with a star inside, identical to the one his wife used to wear. Back at the mansion, he found Ethan already waiting for him. The former journalist looked aged and nervous, his restless hands shuffling through a folder filled with documents. "What did you find out about the hospital?" Theodore asked, pouring a shot of whiskey to calm both their nerves. "You need to understand," Ethan began, his voice low and tense, "that what I've uncovered is just the tip of something much bigger. Santa Clara Hospital wasn't just any ordinary hospital. 30 years ago there was a series of complaints, babies disappearing mysteriously." Theodore felt his blood run cold. Ethan continued, spreading documents on the table. "I managed to access old duty rosters. Your housekeeper, Mildred Hayes, and a nurse named Connie Santos always worked together, and coincidentally, most of the disappearances happened during their shifts." At that moment, a noise at the door made both men turn around. Olivia was standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the documents spread out on the table. In her hands, she held a new drawing, a hospital room with faceless people carrying small bundles in their arms. "Olivia," Theodore called out softly, "do you know this?" "In place." The girl didn't answer directly, but approached the table and began to draw on one of the documents. Her quick and precise strokes formed the same symbol as always, the circle with the star. "She knows," Ethan murmured, watching, fascinated. "Somehow, this girl knows." It was then that Sarah, the therapist, arrived for another session. Upon seeing the scene in the office, her expression changed. "Theodore, I need to show you something," she said, taking a folder from her bag. "In the last sessions, Olivia started making different drawings. They're not just symbols now." The new drawings showed disturbing scenes. Hospital corridors, babies, in cribs, a room with flickering lights, and in all of them, two faceless figures appeared, one wearing the pendant with the star, another with a nurse's badge. "She has recurring nightmares," Sarah explained. "She talks about a white room with lights that flicker and faceless people taking children. At first, I thought they were just traumas manifesting, but now—" A sudden clap of thunder interrupted the conversation. The approaching storm cast the mansion into premature twilight. The lights flickered, and for a moment everyone was silent. It was Olivia who broke the silence, her voice sounding strangely adult. "She showed me where to look." Before anyone could react, the girl ran out of the office. Theodore followed her through the dark corridors of the mansion to Mildred's room. The housekeeper wasn't there, but Olivia went straight to the closet, opening drawers with determination. At the bottom of the last drawer, they found an old metal box. Inside, more photographs from the hospital, yellow documents, and, to Theodore's astonishment, a necklace with a pendant, a circle with a star, identical to the one his wife used to wear. "How did you know?" Theodore asked, his voice trembling. Olivia took the pendant in her small hands, her eyes focused on something distant. "She told me the key was here." At that moment, they heard a noise coming from the garden. Through the window, they saw Mildred running in the rain, carrying a bag. Theodore hurried down the stairs, managing to catch her before she reached the gate. "Mildred, enough lies!" he shouted through the rain. "What happened at that hospital? Who is Connie, really?" The housekeeper stopped, her clothes soaked, looking suddenly very old and tired. "I didn't want to," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Connie made us. She had evidence against all of us, the babies. She said they were going to better families, that we were doing a good thing." A lightning flash illuminated the sky, revealing Olivia standing on the porch, the pendant shining in her hands. The rain continued to fall, relentless, as if trying to wash away decades of buried secrets. The rain continued to fall relentlessly on Oakhaven as Theodore led Mildred back inside the mansion. The housekeeper was shaking, not only from the cold, but from the weight of the revelations that were beginning to surface. In the living room, wrapped in a blanket, she seemed to have aged decades in a matter of minutes. Sarah and Ethan remained, feeling that they were about to witness something important. Olivia sat on the floor, still holding the pendant, her eyes never leaving Mildred's face. The circle with the star shone softly in the light of the lightning that still cut through the sky. "It started 30 years ago," Mildred began, her voice almost a whisper. I was young, fresh out of nursing school. Santa Clara Hospital was considered one of the best in the area for childbirth. Connie had already worked there for years, was respected by everyone. Her wrinkled hand squeezed the blanket as she continued. "At first they were small irregularities. Connie altered documents, changed records. Then the disappearances began. She had a system. She chose poor families, single mothers, vulnerable people. She declared the babies stillborn and sold them to wealthy families who couldn't have children." Theodore felt his stomach churn. Something in the story touched a painful memory, but he couldn't quite identify. "What? And you participated in this?" Ethan asked, his journalistic instinct sharpened. "We had no choice," Mildred replied, tears streaming down her aged face. "Connie kept evidence against all of us. Small mistakes, minor negligences that she meticulously documented. If anyone threatened to speak, she would destroy our careers, our lives." It was then that Olivia stood up abruptly, walking to one of the walls of the room. With a piece of chalk that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, she began to draw. But this time it wasn't just the circle with the star. It was a detailed map of what appeared to be the hospital's basement. "The children were kept here," she said, her voice sounding strangely distant, "in the dark, waiting." Sarah approached the drawing, her professional eyes analyzing every detail. "This looks like a real floor plan. How do you know this, Olivia?" The girl continued drawing, now adding small symbols in different points on the map. "She showed me. Every night, she shows me." "Who shows you, honey?" Theodore asked gently. Before Olivia could answer, Mildred let out a strangled sob. "The pendant. I recognize it now. It was hers, wasn't it? Your wife's?" Theodore nodded slowly, the pieces beginning to fall into place in his mind. "Clara always wore that pendant. Said it was a family heirloom, but how do you know that?" Your wife was at the hospital," Mildred revealed, her voice trembling. "A few weeks before the accident, she was investigating, asking questions about old adoptions. Connie got nervous, started acting strangely. A particularly loud clap of thunder made the mansion's windows shake. Olivia, who had finished her drawing, now wrote numbers next to each symbol on the map. "They're dates," explained Ethan, who had come closer to examine, "all from 30 years ago. They correspond exactly to the dates of the disappearances I found in the records." Theodore felt the world spin around him. His wife had discovered something big enough to cost her life. And now, somehow inexplicably, Olivia seemed to carry the keys to that mystery. "Connie wasn't alone," continued Mildred, her voice growing weaker. "There were other people involved, powerful people. When your wife started investigating, they got scared." "The accident," Theodore murmured, feeling a chill down his spine. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" Mildred lowered her eyes, unable to answer. But her silence said it all. At that moment, Olivia began to sing softly, a strange and hypnotic melody that no one knew. Her small fingers traced the contours of the pendant as she sang. That song. Mildred paled. It was the song that Connie sang to the babies in the hospital basement. Sarah, who had been taking notes, interjected, "In recent days, Olivia has mentioned this song in our sessions. She says she hears it in her dreams, along with the sound of babies crying." "But how?" questioned Ethan. "Olivia wasn't even born at the time of the hospital. How can she know all this?" "Bit." It was then that the light went out completely, plunging the mansion into darkness. For a few seconds, only the sound of rain and thunder filled the room. When a lightning flash illuminated the room, everyone saw Olivia standing in the center, the pendant shining in her hands as if it had its own light. "She chose me," the girl said, her voice sounding different, almost adult, "to tell the truth, to bring justice." Theodore felt a shiver run down his spine. Olivia's words echoed in a way that seemed to transcend the present moment, as if they carried the weight of decades of secrets. "Connie knew her time was running out," continued Mildred, breaking the tense silence. "After your wife started investigating, she became paranoid. She started gathering documents, evidence. She said it was her life insurance." "And where are these documents now?" asked Ethan. Before Mildred could answer, Olivia pointed to her own drawing on the wall, to a specific point on the hospital map, marked with a circle and a star. "Buried," she said simply, "like the truth." A new lightning flash illuminated the room, revealing silent tears streaming down Mildred's face. The housekeeper seemed to be fighting an internal battle, decades of guilt and fear, struggling against the need to finally tell the truth. "There's something else," she said finally, her voice almost inaudible. "Something about Olivia. Something that will change everything." The silence that followed Mildred's statement was broken only by the sound of rain beating against the mansion windows. The darkness seemed to swallow all those present, except Olivia, who remained in the center of the room, the pendant emitting a soft glow between her small fingers. "Connie wasn't just the mastermind of the scheme at the hospital," began Mildred, her voice trembling. "She kept all the records, every detail of the children, of the families. It was her way of ensuring that no one would ever betray her. But there was something more, something she protected even more than the documents." At that moment, Olivia began to draw again on the wall, her movements almost frenetic. The chalk traced the image of a woman holding a baby, and next to her, the symbol of the circle with the star. "Your wife," continued Mildred, looking at Theodore. "She wasn't just investigating the scheme. She had discovered something specific about one of the children, something that Connie had hidden for years." Theodore felt his heart race. What did my wife discover? "There was a child," Mildred took a deep breath. "A baby that Connie didn't sell. She kept her hidden, raised her as if she were her own granddaughter. It was her way of redemption, maybe, or maybe just another one of her power games. Sarah, who had remained silent, watching Olivia draw, felt a shiver run down her spine. "Olivia," she whispered, beginning to understand. "Yes," confirmed Mildred. "Olivia was that child. Connie raised her in secret, isolated from the world. But your wife, Theodore, she found out. And not only that, she discovered where Olivia had come from." A particularly loud thunder shook the mansion. Olivia stopped drawing abruptly, turning to face Mildred with a disturbing intensity. "Your wife started visiting Connie regularly," continued the housekeeper. "At first, we thought it was just part of her investigation. But she was building a connection with Olivia. She spent hours with the girl, telling stories, singing, always wearing that pendant." Ethan, who had been taking notes frantically, interrupted. "But why would Connie allow that? If she was hiding Olivia, because she was losing control," replied Mildred. "The scheme was falling apart. Some families started asking questions, wanting to know more about their children's origins. And your wife, Theodore, she was about to expose everything." Theodore ran his hands over his face, trying to process all the information. "The accident. It was right after that, wasn't it?" "The night before," Mildred confirmed, tears streaming down her aged face. "Your wife had scheduled a meeting with journalists. She had all the evidence, documents, photographs, payment records. And she had something else, something that would prove once and for all Olivia's true identity." The girl approached Theodore, extending the pendant towards him. "She gave me a mission," said Olivia, her voice carrying an impossible maturity for her age. "She said I needed to find the buried truth." "That's why you were digging in the cemetery," murmured Theodore, the pieces finally falling into place. "You were looking for something she hid." "The documents," interjected Ethan. "She must have hidden everything before that night." Sarah, who had been silently analyzing Olivia's drawings on the wall, noticed something. "Look at the pattern of the symbols. They're not random. It's a sequence, like coordinates." Olivia nodded slowly. "The map leads to the treasure," she said, her voice sounding distant. "But first, we need to go back to the beginning." "The hospital," concluded Theodore. "That's where it all started, and that's where we'll find the answers." Mildred stood up abruptly, her face a mask of panic. "No, you don't understand. There are still people, powerful people who don't want the truth to come out. That's why your wife, that's why everything happened. These people," pressed Ethan, his journalistic instinct sharpened. "Who are they?" But before Mildred could answer, a noise coming from the garden caught everyone's attention. Through the windows, blurred by the rain, they saw lights moving among the trees. "They're here," whispered Mildred, her face pale as wax. "They must have followed me. They must have found out." Theodore acted quickly, turning off all the lights in the house. In the dark, they could hear footsteps approaching the mansion. "There's a passage," said Olivia suddenly, pointing to her drawing on the wall. "In the hospital. A tunnel that leads to the basement of the old church. That's where they took the babies." "How do you know this?" asked Sarah, impressed. "She showed me," Olivia replied simply, clutching the pendant. "Every night in my dreams, she shows me the way." Theodore looked at the girl, a sudden understanding, hitting him. The way she spoke, her gestures, the connection to the pendant, everything reminded him of his wife in a way he couldn't explain. "We need to go to the hospital," he said, making a decision. "Now. Before. It's too late." "But the hospital's been abandoned for years," Ethan protested. "How are we going to find anything there?" Olivia took her chalk and quickly drew a new map, more detailed. "I know exactly where to look," she said. "She showed me every corridor, every door, the place where the truth is buried. A new thunderclap shook the mansion, and for a moment the reflection of the lightning made the pendant in Olivia's hands shine intensely. In that instant, everyone in the room felt that they were about to uncover a truth that would change their lives forever. "There's one more thing you need to know," said Mildred, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the last time your wife visited Olivia, about what she discovered that day." The rain had subsided to a fine drizzle when the group arrived at Santa Clara Hospital. The abandoned building loomed against the night sky like a sleeping giant, its broken windows resembling empty eyes watching the visitors. Olivia, holding Theodore's hand tightly, showed no fear at all. "On that last day," continued Mildred, her voice trembling as they walked through the dark corridors, "your wife arrived very agitated. She had discovered something in the old hospital. Records, something that Connie had tried to hide for years." Theodore turned on his flashlight, illuminating the peeling walls. Olivia let go of his hand and walked ahead of the group with surprising certainty, as if she knew every corner of that place. "She discovered that Connie kept a special diary," Mildred went on. "They weren't just records of the scheme. They were personal notes, details about each child, each family, and there were entire pages dedicated to Olivia." The girl stopped in front of a locked door at the end of a corridor. Without hesitation, she pointed to a small opening in the wall next to it. "This way," she said. "The tunnel starts here." Ethan approached with his flashlight, revealing a narrow passage. "How can you be sure?" "Because that's where she brought me," Olivia replied, her voice sounding strangely adult. "Every night in my dreams, she shows me the way." As they squeezed through the passage, Sarah noticed something on the walls. "There are markings, numbers and dates." "Records of the transfers," explained Mildred, her voice laden with guilt. "Each number represents a child taken through this tunnel." The group emerged into a circular room in the basement. The air was heavy with decades of secrets. Olivia walked directly to the center of the room, where a circle was marked on the floor. "It was here," she said, kneeling down. "It was here that she hid the truth." Theodore and Ethan began removing the stones from the floor, revealing a small metal box. Inside they found documents, photographs, and a red-covered notebook. "Connie's diary," whispered Mildred, recognizing the object. Theodore opened the notebook with trembling hands. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, detailing years of secrets. But it was the last pages that made his heart stop. "My God," he murmured, his voice failing. "Your wife discovered the truth that day," said Mildred, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Olivia wasn't just another one of the children from the scheme. She was special to Connie for a very specific reason." Olivia approached Theodore, the pendant shining softly in her hands. "She knew," the girl said. "That's why she chose me to find this." "Connie was my sister," revealed Mildred, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was never able to have children of her own. When the scheme started, she saw it as a way to help families, but also as revenge against the life that had denied her motherhood. But Olivia was different." Theodore continued reading the diary, each word making his world spin faster. "It says here that Olivia was born on May 15th, the same day that your wife lost a baby 6 years ago," completed Mildred, "a baby that was declared stillborn." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia remained standing, her eyes fixed on Theodore, as the truth finally came to light. "Connie chose to keep Olivia because she was the daughter of someone she knew," continued Mildred. "Someone who had worked at the hospital years before as a volunteer, helping needy families. Your wife, Clara." Theodore fell to his knees, tears blurring his vision. "My daughter," he whispered, looking at Olivia as if he was seeing her for the first time. You are my daughter." "Your wife found out everything," said Mildred. She recognized Olivia immediately when she saw her with Connie. The same face, the same eyes. It was like looking at an old picture of herself. She started visiting secretly, building a connection, gathering evidence. "That's why she was so determined to expose the scheme," added Ethan. "It wasn't just about justice. It was about getting her daughter back." "But Connie found out that she knew," continued Mildred. "She panicked. She was afraid of losing Olivia, of losing everything she had built. That's when everything happened." Olivia approached Theodore, extending the pendant towards him. "She visited me one last time," said the girl. "She gave me this and said that one day I would understand, that I needed to be strong and look for the buried truth." "The accident wasn't an accident," confirmed Mildred. "Connie organized everything, but your wife was smarter. She knew she was in danger, so she left all the clues for Olivia to find. The pendant, the drawings, the coordinates. She knew that one day Olivia would find her way to you, Theodore." Sarah, who had been analyzing the documents, found something else. "Here's Olivia's original birth certificate with the real names. And there's more. Medical records, DNA tests, everything that proves the truth." Theodore hugged Olivia, years of pain and loneliness turning into a moment of recognition and love. The girl returned the embrace, and for the first time since. "They found her in the cemetery," she cried. "She never abandoned us," Olivia said softly. "She was guiding me all the time, through dreams, through the pendant, so that I could find you, Dad." 6 months later, the Albright mansion was transformed. The formerly somber walls now displayed colorful drawings by Olivia, who could finally be a normal child. Theodore had come out of his isolation, dedicating himself to helping other families affected by the hospital scheme. Mildred, after confessing everything to the authorities, was helping to identify other children and families involved. Her testimony was crucial in dismantling a network that had operated for decades. On a sunny afternoon, Theodore found Olivia in the garden, sitting under a tree. She was holding the pendant, now transformed into a symbol not of mystery, but of love and redemption. "You know, Dad," she said, smiling, "sometimes I still dream about her, but now she's smiling." Theodore hugged his daughter, watching the circle with the star shine in the sun. The symbol that once represented buried secrets was now a reminder that the truth, however painful, has the power to heal and unite broken hearts. And so, in the Catskill Mountains, a new story began. A story no longer of secrets and pain, but of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. The circle finally closed, and the star inside it shone brighter than ever, illuminating the path to a future full of hope.